Yes, okay. And I have my computer up as well. So if you do have any questions while I'm cooking, you can try and chat it in, or I guess you could unmute yourself too and just kind of yell at me. I always tell people if I'm doing classes in person, which has sadly been a while, that you can always just shout it out if I'm getting lost in what I'm cooking. But I'm very excited to bring you this Verde enchilada casserole, which I created the recipe for probably at least 3 years ago. I had first made it as actual rolled enchiladas, but I am a fan of kind of streamlining processes where possible, getting more food in, and just saving people time, because I know most people are living very busy lives, and there's a higher likelihood that I can get healthy food on your plate if I make it even simpler. So by layering these ingredients instead of rolling them, you can make it that much faster. However, if you're someone who does enjoy a rolled enchilada, you can definitely roll the filling into your tortillas and put the sauce on top. And for those of you who are going to be making this to donate it to one of the food pantries, I'm really hopeful that you find it so easy that maybe you'd even donate it another time as well, because it comes together pretty quickly. So I thought I'd start by showing you how I will just set up my cooking station. So I have a mat that I can set down. If you probably don't, you can actually just wet a washcloth and put it under, but that'll help your cutting board to not slip. And that makes cooking even safer, because you don't want your cutting board slipping underneath you when you're using a knife. Then I have all of my ingredients laid out here, which I call, it's called, now I don't have a French accent, but it's called mise en place, which means putting everything in its place. And that will help you streamline your cooking process as well, so that everything is just right there when you need it while you're getting things ready. And then we're going to cut things and prep them, so when we turn to the stove, they're also ready to go. The first thing I'm going to do is grab my onion. This one actually had a lot of skin that already has come off. When I cut an onion, the first thing I do is I take off the stalk end. That would be the end that comes out of the ground. And then I like to take off the root end. You could also skip that part and cut right through the center, but I'll cut through the center once I get that off. And I peel off the more fibrous layer if there was a lot of paper, but this is still pretty fibrous and papery. That's not something you're gonna want in your finished meal. So I will take those off. And having a bowl for your compostables is great, or you can just toss it in your sink if that happens to be handy. And then I look for, there's the tighter wound end, which was the root end, and then the looser end. That's the end I like to cut into. So I will be cutting this direction because I'm right-handed. What I do when I'm cutting an onion to get a nice even dice, I lay my hand flat on top with just a little pressure, always keeping my fingers away from the blade so they don't get cut. And I slice back towards the root end, but I'm not slicing all the way through. I always leave that connected, and you'll see why. It's going to make it so much simpler compared to if my onion was falling all over the cutting board. And you'll notice I also change the position of my hand. I always want to keep that pressure to keep the onion firm and secure against the board, but I didn't want to always keep my hand flat. Then I turn the onion, and again, what I see people do is they want to bring their knife through this way. You have to bring the tip of the knife back. So we're going to leave this intact still. And then we cut down all the way to the cutting board. But again, notice that maybe my finger will make it even easier to see that I'm not cutting that back end. And, you know, if you're not super comfortable with a knife, don't put your finger this close to a blade. I have done this a lot of times, so I like to use that as a demonstration. And then I come through a third direction. So each cut has been a different direction, and this is where our diced onion will just fall apart. This helps you get a nice even dice, and the more even your food is cut, the more evenly it will cook, which is important. You also don't want one really big piece of onion and one really small piece of onion as you're tasting your food. That can make it less pleasant. And you will end up with this tail piece. So I come through, do a couple cuts, a pivot, and a couple cuts, and then I have my onion dice. So I would love to see who wants to cut the next half. Just kidding, unfortunately. Can't do that. I do love teaching hands-on classes, but again, this has just not been the year for that. So a little faster. I come through cutting back, but not all the way through. And this takes practice. So if you try this and you cut all the way through, it's okay. If you cut off a bottom layer, just set your whole onion away from that and then go here. Don't try and keep it stacked. It'll be slippery and it'll make it a little more cumbersome. So then coming back through again, this direction, cutting all the way to my cutting board. And then one more time. Keep your body nice and square to your cutting board is also helpful for ease of use of your knife and visually seeing what you're working with. And there we go. So my onion is cut. And next so the recipe calls for frozen greens, which I do have. I just got some fresh because I love showing this tip, and you don't have to use frozen for anything. It makes it that much faster. However, there's a lot of benefit to using fresh things. And if you're a gardener, which would be fantastic, you may still have kale in your yard. You could definitely have spinach coming up soon. So I went ahead and I got this kale. And when I buy kale at the store, I cut it off on the end, just like you do fresh flowers. So that's a fresh cut from when I brought it home. And then I put it in a glass of water. This kale, I'll actually be honest, I didn't do that when I first brought it home last night. I put it in the fridge and it got a little bit wilty today. So earlier today, I did cut it and it crisps right back up. It just sucks that water up back into the cells of the plant. And we have nice crisp kale. So that's a trick if you do ever have kale that goes limp. If you're going to strip your kale, for this kind, which is called Dino or Lacinato kale, I just hold on to the stem, peel back a little bit of the greenery, and then gently make an O shape with my fingers and pull through. And sometimes more comes off than others. You can do that. This is definitely edible. It's just very fibrous. So it's up to you. The frozen kale actually will have a lot of these in them. So it doesn't really matter when you're cooking it. The longer you cook it, the softer this can break down. The more you might mince this up, the more it's going to break down. So if I am stripping all of this, I actually often like to mince this up, especially if it's a soup. But casseroles work well too. So I can, yes.
There's one question. So how long would you recommend leaving the kale out?
Leaving the kale out of...
Yeah, I'm assuming if it's like frozen, if you keep it out.
If you're using frozen kale, you can put it frozen directly into this meal and it'll just melt into the pan. It'll fall right there. If you're talking about how long would I leave kale out of the fridge, I normally refrigerate my kale right when I come home. It probably would be okay if you left it out, but I recommend keeping your greens that you buy at the store refrigerated. So I didn't leave this.
What about keeping it in the glass of, like the jar of water? How long did that take for it to suck up the water? Maybe?
I bet maybe it's been an hour and a half that it's been in there. So not super long time. And I store it in the fridge in glasses of water all the time. So that they're not mutually exclusive, jar or fridge. Does that answer the question? Hopefully, feel free to chat in if you want more info. So I'll go ahead and take my stalks here, and I'm gonna just come through and mince them, chop them pretty fine. The more you use a knife, the more proficient you get. So you might not work this fast in your kitchen. That is completely okay. But I just encourage you to keep practicing. Years ago when I was working in a kitchen. I asked a friend who'd been a chef longer than me, I'm like, how are you so fast at this? And that was her answer. She's like, you just have to keep doing it. And I get rusty too. The more that I cook though, the faster I get. And then when you're working with anything, you want to make sure it's a size that feels comfortable to you. So I'm just going to grab some of this kale that feels like a comfortable amount. And I kind of roll it up, make it a tight ball. This doesn't have to be super fine. It's really up to you how small you want your kale. If you don't like as much texture, you can certainly cut it up really, really small. You could even throw it in a food processor if you wanted it to be really well minced. That will shrink the total like volume of what you're making for your casserole though. And I'm going to be using lots of greens. That's another reason I love this recipe, because greens are so good for us. And I think it's fabulous that green is kind of what we think of as being environmentally friendly, and they're also good for us. And then even financially, right? Green is the color that is associated with money very often. So green is just a great color all the way around. All righty, I am quickly running out of space on my cutting board. Another tip that I will give you is to make sure you do clear your cutting board. I like this nice large size for a board, so I have plenty of room, but sometimes even with the amount of cutting I do run out of some space. And I need some room to cut my broccoli, which is the vegetable that is called for that I use fresh. And a note on broccoli is the stem is edible. So this is a great way to not waste as much food. It can be pretty fibrous on the outside, so I cut off the outside of it. That's how I peel it. And then this part is really delicious. It actually reminds me of kohlrabi, if it's a vegetable you're familiar with. And I love kohlrabi. I won't munch on it right now because then my mouth would be full as I'm talking to you, and it might not be super professional. But I'll set all of my stems aside, and I guarantee that I will be munching on them later after class. So the broccoli, think about the size that will fit into a casserole. It's going to cook, and soften, but broccoli doesn't really shrink much as it cooks. So I do like to cut my broccoli down into smaller florets. And they'll kind of break up naturally the more of the stalk you take off. They just have all of these tiny little florets that you'll see, but you can keep cutting until, again, relatively even in size, and make them a size that's going to work in your casserole. Cooking is always going to be an experiment as well. So if you make this one time and maybe you felt like your broccoli was a little big, then the next time you make it, you can make it a little smaller, and that's totally okay. So I always like to say practice makes permanent. And for a recipe, hopefully, that you love so much you want to keep making it, you get to keep practicing it until you find just exactly how you like to season it and cut things for it. And then eventually you've got your perfect version of that recipe. Okay, so I think that is our chopping we need to do. I'm now going to mix our tofu together. So I got this tofu, and maybe those of you who are here are pretty well versed with tofu, but just in case you're not, I wanted to show that I carefully cut, and I use my knife away from me on 3 sides of the package. And there's water in here, so I tip it over while holding it all in, and then just get my tofu out like so. And your hands are your best tool in the kitchen. So go ahead and use your hands to crumble that tofu right into your bowl. I watched, I'm sorry, I forget, was it was her name Linda? I know Linda Hendrickson, you're here, but was Linda the last chef?
Yes.
Yes, and she did, I think, a tofu ricotta that was not unlike this But actually I've had people tell me that in this recipe, they think it almost seems egg-like, and you may have experienced tofu scramble, which is one of my favorite breakfasts. But it almost gives it like this maybe eggy kind of consistency. You'll just have to see when you try this recipe at home. So we've crumbled our tofu. We're gonna add our nutritional yeast, which I already have pre-measured here for ease, and then some tahini, which is ground sesame seed paste. And that gives a nice richness and more diverse nutrients. Sesame seeds are actually a fabulous source of calcium. So for people who are not consuming dairy or want to consume less dairy and might be concerned, where do I get my calcium? Well, sesame seeds are a great place. So again, get your hands right in there. I want to make sure that this is very evenly mixed together, and the tahini can be sticky. So just using your fingers to mix that all together, just like so. And then thankfully I've got a sink right next to me. I am also going to add my spices in here. So I have garlic granules and cumin. I realized as I was setting up, my cumin is actually a little low. So I'm going to just add all of it. And this is a place with spices that you can really customize. So we're going with a Mexican themed meal. If you wanted to add things like chili powder, straight, or like chili powder or straight chili, you could do that. You could add coriander, you could add oregano, anything that sounds like it would fit with the seasonings here. But I just kind of kept it simple with a couple that adds some nice flavor without going overboard. That's a thing that I have done before. I've kind of added maybe a little too much, and it depends on the cuisine and what works with it. So there we've got that mixture looking delicious. I've made.
Yeah, one question from me. Yeah, what type of tofu did you use? Because there's extra firm, soft, those kind of variants, right? So which one did you use? I missed that.
Yeah, this one is extra firm. I would use firm or extra firm. Anything less than that doesn't get the same consistency when you crumble it, but firm or extra firm are totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to turn over to the stove now. And I'm not sure if your other chefs have done oil-free cooking or not, but that is something that I do. All of my cooking, all my recipes are oil-free. And if you're into plant-based nutrition, you may have come across the doctors who also talk about using no oil in cooking. But something I think about as well is just the amount of processing of food, and that there can be a lot of waste when they're making oils. And so I like to be able to use the whole food. If I am going to use something that oils are often made out of, such as avocado, avocado is a great topping on this dish, but I'd rather use the whole avocado than just the oil for it. And so I'll be showing you my technique for oil-free cooking. I make sure I have water right next to my pan. And what I'm looking for is that my pan is going to get nice and hot. And when it's hot, my drops of water will dance on the surface. It's really easy to cook without oil once you know the technique and you practice it. Of course, everything takes practice. So give yourself grace as you learn things. The reason that it won't stick when it's hot is because you're creating that heat surface where things aren't going to just like cook to it. If I was to add my food while my pan was cold and then heat it, it's like they cook together, and that's where you have issues with sticking. And honestly, even if you were cooking with oil, you can have that same sticking issue. You really want your pan to be nice and hot when you're adding your food. So I just keep my water right there, and I keep dripping it. Oh, you know what I did not do is I didn't preheat my oven before when I first started the recipe. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now as well. Turn my oven on to 350, which is what the recipe calls for. And I'll bring my cutting board right over to my work surface. So these things are ready as well. And I've already got my pan ready to go, like 9 by 13, 9 by 11. I honestly am so bad with the measurements of pans. It's your standard casserole dish pan. All right. So we are starting to see some sizzling. That's what I like to see. You'll also notice when I add my onions, hopefully you can hear it. I think you'll be able to. You're going to hear them sizzle, and that's what I want. Also having some kind of utensil to stir with right when you're going to add to it. Okay, that's looking good. I want nothing less than that before I add my onion. I normally advise to get it even a little bit hotter for newbies, just to make sure that things aren't going to stick, but I've done this so many times, I feel very confident. So I'm gonna add my onion and my kale stems right now. And I'm gonna start by getting my onions shiny and soft. I wanna make sure those aren't going to be crunchy and have that spicy onion bite when I finish my casserole. So just letting that cook a little bit. If you continue to stir it, you'll notice there's no sticking. If you let it sit for a while, it can start to stick a little bit, but that's okay. It's not burning right away. I am using the Scan pan, which is like a non-toxic, non-stick pan, because it's my biggest pan. I cook with stainless steel all the time, and that you can really see as the onions start to release their sugars. That is the caramelized sugars on the pan. And if you add a little bit of water at a time and then just continue to let them cook, you can completely caramelize onions without any oil or any fat at all. And they're absolutely delicious. For this recipe, I'm not trying to caramelize the onions. They don't need to be. I guess you could if you wanted to, but I simply want to soften them a bit, bring out some of the sweetness that happens as they cook, and you'll see them turning shiny, which gives you an indication they're getting done to the point that you want. I'm gonna add more water through adding frozen vegetables also, and then the water in many vegetables, including the broccoli here, but carrots, celery, bell peppers. If I was doing some kind of a stir fry and adding those, they're going to release their liquid and help to deglaze the sugars of the onion. So onion is the only thing, and garlic for sure, that I ever really might add some water, and that's what this is here for as well, is if I needed it, I could be adding a very small splash. And when I say small splash, and I'll do like maybe that much at a time. I don't want them like swimming in water, because that can inhibit some of the flavors developing as the sugars release their onions.
So Emily, what about covering it with a lid? Does that help or not help the process?
So you can definitely cover things with a lid. That will like steam them. And I don't normally do that with my onions at first, just because I like to keep an eye on how they're like what's happening with them. But especially once I added like my broccoli to maybe help that pop a little bit faster in color, which is where I'm trying to go with it, then you could always cover it with a lid. I don't do that often, honestly. Maybe it's my like control issues. I just like to see what's going on as I'm cooking. All right, so if you notice, these onions are getting just ever so slightly opaque and definitely softening up. Our kale stems have popped to a beautiful bright green, which I love seeing. So I'm going to add all the frozen veggies. So this is chopped spinach, and these are 12-ounce bags. They're not a pound. It's, 3/4 of a pound. This recipe is very forgiving in terms of exactly how much you do of things. I just personally try and get mostly organic, and these are the size bags that my Fred Meyer sells. And then I'll grab all of my fresh kale as well, so it can utilize the water that's going to come off those frozen veggies.
You have a question on how high do you keep the heat?
I start it, and pretty much for what I'm doing here, keep it around medium-high heat. If it just depends in general of what the recipe is. I like the higher heat as I'm trying to cook these things that already have high water content. But if I was concerned about overcooking the onions, then I would turn it down to a medium or maybe a little less than a medium. And then for some recipes that are maybe just simmering for a while, then I definitely will turn it down to a low. So
Would
you
you
can
recommend
see
leaving
how,
out, oh, sorry. Would you recommend leaving out the spinach if it's frozen too?
leaving out the spinach.
Yeah.
You don't have to leave them out. I pulled them at about maybe 5, so they're still relatively frozen, but you could pull them straight from the freezer and that would be completely okay. They're just gonna take whatever time they take to thaw, but you're putting them into a hot pan, so it'll be totally okay. And all I'm doing right now is working to thaw the frozen veggies, and then since I added the fresh kale as an extra, also making sure that that cooks. And for that, I want to make sure any of these pieces that obviously are still the green of the kale from the store, and I want them to kind of pop in color. So this would be a place, Ashwin, that putting a lid on top could maybe make this a little bit like kind of help the whole process. It would steam them, but I find like the process of stirring and like pouring myself into my food somewhat therapeutic. So I tend to just like doing this. And then I'll go ahead and add all of my broccoli and start stirring that in, which I'm doing.
One more question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're using your stainless steel pan, do you heat the pan to the mercury ball stage before adding the onions and then deglaze the pan while cooking them, or would you recommend not cooking with heat this high?
Yes, I would heat my stainless steel pan until I get the mercury ball. Then I would add my onions and just be stirring them. And if I needed to, add small splashes of water. If you know you don't want your onions to get any caramelization at all, you can add water, maybe a 1/4 cup at the same time as you add your onions to the pan. That's exactly what I would do. Yeah. So we are just so close to the stage of building our casserole. And I just ideally want our broccoli to pop in color. So I'm going to kind of let it be for a second. And then grab a jar of the salsa. So any green salsa will work if you want to make your own. If you grow tomatillos or you love making your own salsa, fantastic. I don't personally have a lot of tomatillos, especially this time of year. So that is what green salsa is made out of. It's a tomatillo base instead of a red tomato base. And this one I find really easy to work with for this recipe because it's a thinner consistency. You'll see that when I pour it. It's not super chunky, and it's tasty. It already has a lot of salt in this. Like there's quite a bit of sodium in this salsa, as there is in most salsas. So you'll notice I haven't added any salt in any other part of the recipe. It's because it's all coming from this. I don't think anybody will notice that there's no additional salt added. But I do add a cup of this to my filling. I'm going to try and do it. Thank you. My husband, who's holding the camera, apparently thinks maybe we could like tag team it.
So this is a question I generally ask all the chefs. So would there be a vegan restaurant that you would recommend our viewers to try out in Portland and what they should try there?
Oh, gosh. Portland is great for vegan restaurants. So, gosh, what do we like, Gran? Yeah, for brunch, Blossoming Lotus. We really like that. Or their live nachos during, well, they might have those at brunch. I'm not sure, but their live nachos are awesome. Raw, that means raw nachos. They dehydrate their cracker chip thing that you eat. I've had an amazing salad at Harlow. It was a long time ago, so I don't even know if it's still on the menu, but I really like that. I love, for like a really nice meal, Farm Spirit. And I'm not sure what they've been doing. I know they changed a lot during COVID in terms of what they were offering. But if you want like a high-end meal, what they do is amazing. And they source everything from, I want to say, like 100-mile radius. So it's incredibly local. Talk about like good for the climate. That's it right there. Absolutely amazing. What's that pizza place? Virtuous Pie. We like Virtuous Pie. Yeah, those are some favorites. There's still plenty that I have not tried. So this is just a cup of this salsa to put in here, and then I'm gonna add, and I can actually turn the heat off now. So I got my broccoli where I wanted it, beautiful green. And then I'm going to add all of this and mix everything together.
So what would you recommend for making a green sauce?
For making a green sauce, well, you would need a lot of tomatillos. So if somebody has not worked with tomatillos before, a big one is like that big. So they can be very small. And they also have a husk on the outside, similar to, what are those berries called? They're the little orange berries. Are they gooseberries? I want to say they might be a gooseberry, but they have that little pretty paper on the outside.
Ground cherries? Ground cherries?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Yeah. Or pineapple tomatillos, I've heard them
Okay.
called.
Yeah. I'm honestly not sure. I've eaten them. They were good. They're pretty sour. So you would take a bunch of tomatillos. I think they're delicious roasted, and it can also help soften them up, but you don't have to roast them. You could use them fresh, and you would just process them with probably some salt, cilantro, jalapeno, onion. If you find, you can find recipes all over the internet for a Verde salsa, I'm sure, but if you've ever made your own homemade red salsa with tomatoes, pretty similar ingredients. Like, let me look at what this says. Tomatillos, chili pepper, onion, and salt. Yeah, so that's all that's in there. So this is our filling right here. Gets kind of, I was gonna say goopy. I don't know if that's like a delicious word or not, but it does, the tofu kind of gets it to stick together. And then grab your tortillas for layering up. And I start by pouring some sauce on the bottom, and I just want enough. I don't want to make like a whole soup, but I want to make sure it's covered. So whatever it takes for that. If you're being more modest with your sauce, you could probably get away with just a couple jars. I like to have 3 on hand, just to make sure I don't end up overdoing it in my layers and then not having enough on the top, because I think that's the place that it's really important, is that you have enough on the top. And you can layer these as perfectly as you wish. If you want to like cut out pieces, I often will just kind of break things and set them. There's a lot of different kinds and shapes of tortillas. So get my tortillas down, and then I might just use my scoop here since this is still hot. And we're gonna do as many layers as will fit in here. It always depends on the size of pan you're using, but sometimes I end up with some extra filling. You can also use this just in tortillas as a taco as well. If you had some extras, maybe you're making your casserole to take to the shelter, and then you want to make yourself some dinner, then that would work really well. And there's not like any real science to the rest of it. We're just gonna fit all of this together. I really like making sure I have a good layer of tortillas because I love tortillas. I love corn tortillas. I do press it down just to get a good condensed casserole. I think it's really yummy when it's like that. I'm gonna grab another jar there. Sure, get that all over. I'm curious, has anybody made a Verde enchilada casserole or even Verde enchiladas before? Do you like Verde salsa? It's kind of probably my favorite. If I had to choose a salsa that I could only eat, it would be green salsa. Somebody's chatting and you can tell me, right?
No one's chatting.
Nobody's chatting in. Okay, maybe this is a first, which is also really exciting. I hope you enjoy it, and I think it's so good that this is a great way for people who might be more skeptical of eating this many greens. I put a lot of green vegetables in here, but I also make it really, really tasty.
You have one question
Good.
is, what's the difference between salsa verde and green enchilada sauce?
It's probably just going to be the ingredients. I think green enchilada sauce is also made with tomatillos. I don't know what else is in it. Store-bought enchilada sauce, I am often a little leery of some of the ingredients I find in it. So I try and make my own enchilada sauce, but this sauce I don't mind. So, you know, we each make all of our own choices when it comes to what ingredients we want and don't want and all of that. But I think it might just be a little different ingredients. And I don't normally see the seeds, the seeds are in this, and they are normally not in enchilada sauce, so they're probably straining it, assuming that they are using tomatillos for that. Just because I'm going to do that. Okay, so this is a place where I kind of want to do another small layer of my filling because I have it. I could end up making a huge mess of my oven, but I'm going to do it anyways. And it'll also give us a little bit bigger casserole to share with our friends. But I want to make sure, well, I have a whole nother jar, so you can see that as well. So I have another casserole pan that I sometimes use that's even bigger than this. And if you have one that's deeper, then obviously those things will fit too. I'll just do a light layer and then one more layer of tortillas. If you are doing what I do and trying to get as much in there as possible, I recommend putting your pan on top of a casserole, or not a casserole, on top of a baking sheet to catch any drips, just so it doesn't make a mess of your oven. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a little bit more, but I will call that good. And put my last layer of tortillas on there, pressing down to really compact them. I'm already getting some drips, and I just don't mind. I think food should be an experience, something that we kind of have fun with, and it's okay if it gets messy sometimes. I'm definitely gonna want some more salsa. So this is the thing, is you might not use a full 3 jars, but I pretty much always want more than just 2. This layer is the layer you really want to make sure is covered so that they don't end up dry and kind of crunchy. You want them to also soften, and the sauce is needed so that they will get soft. You can add extra sauce at the end as well. There we go. There. So it might not be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen at this point, but it's going to be absolutely delicious. To cover it, if I'm going to use foil, I'm a fan of using parchment. We don't want any aluminum in our diet. That's not a good thing. And especially with the high acid of the sauce, there is a higher propensity for the aluminum to leach into that. So I just put a layer of parchment on top and then put a layer of aluminum foil over that. This will help seal it and kind of help it steam as it cooks. Those tortillas, everything's cooked obviously, but the tortillas are really going to soften and everything's going to cook together. And it's going to be so, so delicious. So I'm going to get that in the oven. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Cassie, and she is going to show you how to make refried beans, easy from scratch. And it would be an awesome side that you could have with a casserole like this.
All right. Great, thank you. All right, so on to the refried beans. So I am using a cast iron pan, and I have it on medium heat. And I'm going to do the same thing Emily did. I'm going to splash a little bit of water on the pan and wait until we get the mercury ball where the little balls kind of dance around, where the water balls up. And then I'm going to add some onions. So I've already chopped my onions up. Oh, you can't really see that. Diced. So that's a half of an onion diced. So once we get this pan hot, and I'm pretty sure it's nowhere near hot. By the way, I don't have a camera person, so I'm gonna have to do this a lot to talk to you and then to show you the pan. So now that you're dizzy, I'm gonna splash some water on there, and nothing's happening yet, so we're gonna wait a little longer. I had totally planned to heat this pan up while Emily was talking, but then I got completely sucked into the enchilada cooking and totally forgot to heat the pan up. So we're gonna wait for that to heat up. In fact, I might even put it on medium high so it takes a little longer. But I'll tell you what, I'll take you through all the other stuff, my mise en place here. So I've got the onions diced, that's a half an onion. I've got 5 cloves of garlic minced, and I like to use a garlic press. They're my favorite because you don't have to worry about trimming off the little stem end of the cloves. You can just throw them in the press and then squeeze it, and this nice little garlic mince comes out. And then I've got 2 15-ounce cans of pinto beans with the liquid ready to go there. You could also do it from dry beans, but then you'd have to be prepared to soak your beans and then cook them. It takes a while, so it's really nice to have some convenient canned beans ready to go. Pinto beans, I don't know if I said that. And then the spice mix, I already put all together. So this is cumin, paprika, sea salt, chili powder, and black pepper. So I can hear some sizzling going on. So let's see what's happening here. Sizzling definitely, but not little balls of water bouncing around. But I've cooked without oil enough too to be pretty okay with throwing the onions in a little early. I'm not too worried about it. It's truly amazing how easy it is to cook without oil, that it makes me wonder why I was thinking I had to use oil for so many years. Not really sure where that came from, but it's really fine without it. So I'm just gonna stir them around and add a splash of water if I need to, if they start to stick or burn. But usually the moisture that cooks out of the onions is enough, and I don't have to add too much more. Especially in this pan, it's a really old cast iron pan, so I don't get too many problems with sticking. So I'm just gonna go for long enough for these to look translucent. So probably, it's gonna be maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. And then we'll add the garlic. So yeah, while I'm sauteing these onions, I just wanted to say, I wanted to share this tip that I learned. Bad back, like I do, and cooking for a while gives you back pain. Stand with your legs spread really wide, and then you're not hunched over. You can keep your back straight, but you're still close to the pan. Just a little tip I thought I'd share. I just learned it, and it's very exciting for me because after an hour or two of cooking, my back is really feeling it. So the other thing I was going to say is that the cooking without oil thing. I used to think that the sticking would be a problem, and it's not. You can see there's no problem. I used to think that flavor. So far, no one can tell in my cooking that I'm not cooking in oil. It's not like anyone's like, I think you sauteed that in water. The thing to watch out for, though, like Emily said, is just to not let the onions get too waterlogged. Then you're not building up flavor. So we're going to saute these until they're soft and translucent. Adding water if we need to. I can see it's starting to change color a little bit, softening up a little. And I'm seeing a little sticking, so I'm going to add a little tiny bit of water. A lot of steam. We're getting a little color now. There's a little bit of caramelization going on. So I think we're good to add the garlic. So I'm going to add the 5 cloves of garlic. And sometimes when I add garlic, I notice that it sticks quite a bit more than onion. And so I have to add a little more water than I normally would have to. So you want to saute that garlic for 1 to 2 minutes until you can really smell it well.
Okay. Which is your go-to restaurant, like a vegan restaurant in Portland?
Oh, I'm so glad somebody asked me that question too. I definitely second everything Emily said. Those are all of my favorites too. We eat at Harlow on the regular when we have to eat out. Farm Spirit blows my mind. We had a fancy Valentine's Day dinner there, and it was just crazy, amazing, good, and I can't say enough about that place. Virtuous Pie, we get pizza there when we're doing pizza. I don't know, I think she covered them all. Same favorites I have. Any tips for chopping the garlic?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just about to read the question. Yeah.
Okay. This is the garlic press that I use. So I'm just peeling the garlic cloves, throwing them in there, smashing them through the little holes, and it comes out minced. This is my favorite. I have tried other things like just cutting it with a knife. Oh no, that's the only other way I've tried, never mind. And I just really prefer the little garlic press. It makes it really easy. So that is ready to go. So the next step is to add the pinto beans. So that's 2 cans of pinto beans. I did not drain them. I did not rinse them. We're going to need the moisture anyway. So stirring that in. And at this point, if you did strain the beans, or drain them, I mean, and rinse them, or if you cooked your own and you already drained all the liquid off, you could add water too. But you want to have a pretty moist, slightly runny mixture. Sorry, I was distracted by my dog making sounds. Then I'm tossing in the spice mixture. So again, that's cumin, paprika, or cumin. I always pronounced it cumin, and I probably should switch to cumin because that's actually how you say it. Cumin, paprika, a little bit of salt, chili powder, Chili powder is optional. You can use none or less or more, depending on what you prefer. It can get kind of spicy depending on the brand you use. If I were making this for my 2 5-year-olds, I would definitely not add the chili powder, because if one molecule of chili powder enters their bodies, they know, and they will let me know about it. So I'm gonna stir that up. Oh, Ethiopian food and Indian food, yes. Yes, 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 so good. Okay, it's distracted by the idea of all the great restaurants around here. There is a vegan Indian restaurant, I think.
Yeah, that's in downtown. So that's the Maruti Indian restaurant. Yeah.
Yes, and I think there's another one too, though. But I can't think of the name of it now. As for Ethiopian, we used to go to one, and I can't think of the name of it now, and they had a really great vegan platter meal that we loved. If I think of the name, I'll shout it out when I think of it. So we've got all that mixed up together, and then we're going to turn the heat down a little bit. Well, actually, no, not yet. I'm going to leave the heat up until I get a little bit of a simmer going. And then we're going to simmer on low for about 10 to 20 minutes, stirring occasionally. And you can add a little more water or bean cooking liquid if you need to, if it starts to get a little too dry. This is looking good. It's pretty runny, but not like a soup. So those are going to cook for 10 to 20. We don't have that much time. I'm just going to let you know about next steps. So after they've simmered for 10 to 20 minutes, you can either blend it to a smooth puree, which is how I personally like my refried beans. Or if you like it chunky, you can mash with a potato masher, or just a fork until you get the consistency you like. I have one of these immersion blenders, and that's probably what I will do when it's done simmering, is just buzz through it till it's as smooth as I want it. You could also spoon it into a blender and blend it until you have it as smooth as you want to. So that's about it. Blend it and serve.
Right.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Emily, I'm going to switch back to you. All right. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you, Casey.
You're welcome.
And if anybody has any questions for Cassie or I, feel free to let us know. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you're excited to try making these things.
To everyone who's on the call and would like to cook for a homeless shelter this weekend, I have put in a link in the chat, and please do sign up for any slots or any meal that you would like to cook for the homeless shelter.
All right.
All right. Thank you all for joining in, and hope you all have a good evening.
I see one question. Did I miss this question about how I would make veggie tacos, Christina? I'm not sure if you mean about with the filling that was left over. I would just, for that, if that's what the question is, I always say warm your tortillas before using them for tacos. So just heat a dry saute pan until it's warm, and then warm your tortillas for maybe 30 to 60 seconds per side. It helps them get more pliable, and I tell you, it'll make them taste so much better as well. And then, so I actually, while Cassie was cooking, I just put my little bit of filling leftovers in this dish. So then I would just take these and just put them down the center of my tortilla. and maybe throw a little avocado and cilantro in there, and it would be absolutely delicious. Yeah. And if anybody wants to connect with me with any other questions or in any ways, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Love and Plants. And my website is loveandplants.com. You can reach out to me through my contact form there. But I love meeting people, and I'm so thankful that you've spent this evening with us, because we love sharing our love for plant-based food with others.